The call came at 6:42 p.m. It was the kind of time when the city slowly shifted from routine to reflection. In Emma Carter's apartment, the light from the setting sun stretched across the hardwood floor, slipping between the edges of furniture like something trying to hold on a little longer. Outside her window, Chicago was beginning to glow, headlights flickering on, windows lighting up one by one, the hum of life continuing without pause. Emma stood near the kitchen counter, one hand resting lightly against the cool marble surface. She had just finished rinsing a glass, droplets still clinging to her fingers when her phone vibrated. She didn't look at the screen. She didn't need to. Something in her chest tightened before she even picked it up. A quiet instinct she had learned not to ignore. She answered without saying hello. There was a pause. Not long, just enough. Enough for everything inside her to shift. When the voice finally spoke, it was careful, distant, controlled in a way that made it worse. Words were said, necessary ones, measured ones, but Emma barely heard them in full. She didn't need to. The meaning reached her before the sentences did. And just like that, something steady inside her life slipped out of place. The call ended quickly. No dramatic goodbye, no lingering silence, just a quiet disconnect. Emma remained standing, phone still in her hand, staring at nothing. The room felt different now, too still, too aware. She set the phone down on the counter and turned toward the sink. The faucet hadn't been closed all the way. A slow, steady drip echoed in the quiet space. Drip, drip, drip. She watched it like it mattered, like counting each drop might keep her grounded. Emma didn't cry. Not yet. She had always been good at managing moments like this, compartmentalizing, staying calm, staying reasonable. It was how she survived difficult things. She would organize her thoughts, break the problem into pieces, find something practical to hold on to. But that night, none of it worked. The silence didn't just stay in the room, it followed her. From the kitchen to the living room, from the living room to the hallway, from the hallway to the bedroom. It clung to her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. She tried to distract herself, picked up a book, put it down, turned on the television, turned it off, opened her laptop, closed it again without reading a single word. Nothing stuck. Her mind kept circling back to the same empty space the call had left behind. Eventually, she reached for her phone again, not with intention, not with a plan, just instinct. Her thumb moved across the screen, opening her contacts list. Names blurred together as she scrolled. Friends, colleagues, distant family members. Each name came with expectations, concern, questions, advice she wasn't ready to hear. Emma paused. She didn't want solutions. She didn't want someone to fix anything. She just didn't want to feel alone in it. Before she could decide what to do, a message appeared at the top of her screen. "Hey, Emma, just wanted to check in. You crossed my mind today." Lucas. She stared at the name longer than she meant to. Her first instinct was hesitation. Lucas was 22. Too young, she had always told herself. Too easy to talk to. Too kind in a way that felt unguarded. She had met him months earlier at the Community Arts Center, on the north side of the city. It had started as something simple. Weekend volunteering. A way to fill time that work couldn't. The center was small but lively, filled with local artists, rotating exhibits, and a steady flow of people who came and went without much expectation. Lucas had been there from the beginning, helping organize displays, setting up events, balancing everything between his college classes. At first, their conversations were casual. Art, books, small observations about people who passed through the gallery. But over time, something shifted. Lucas listened differently. Not like someone waiting for their turn to speak. Not like someone trying to impress. He paid attention, fully. Emma had noticed that long before she realized how much she valued it. Now, staring at his message, her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She could ignore it. She probably should. But the quiet inside her felt heavier than her hesitation. So she typed, "I'm not okay." The reply came almost immediately. "Do you want to talk? I can listen." Emma exhaled slowly, not realizing she had been holding her breath. That was all it took. They talked that night. At first, the conversation moved carefully. Like both of them were aware of the space they were stepping into. Emma didn't explain everything, not the details, not the full weight of what the call had taken from her. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke in pieces, about feeling tired, about carrying more than she let people see, about plans that never quite turned into the life she had imagined. Lucas didn't interrupt. He didn't rush her, Sometimes he responded with quiet understanding. Sometimes he let the silence sit between messages, as if he knew she needed the space just as much as the conversation. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. The sound against her windows filled the room in a way that made it feel less empty. Hours passed without Emma noticing. For the first time since the call, the tightness in her chest eased just slightly, but enough to matter. When they finally said goodnight, the clock read 1:14 a.m. Emma set her phone down on the bedside table and stared at the ceiling. The heaviness was still there, but it had softened. Like sharp edges had been rounded, just enough for her to breathe through them. The next morning came too quickly. Emma woke to the same weight in her chest, the same quiet pressing against the walls of her apartment. But something felt different, subtle, less suffocating. Her phone buzzed beside her. "Hope you slept okay." She smiled before she could stop herself. It surprised her, that small automatic reaction. She sat up, leaning against the headboard, and typed back something simple. Days passed. Then weeks. Their conversations became part of her routine. Not intense, not overwhelming, just steady. Lucas checked in. Emma answered. They talked about his classes, assignments, deadlines, moments of doubt. She talked about work, long days, small frustrations, occasional wins that felt bigger than they should. Sometimes they joked. Sometimes they shared things that felt unexpectedly personal. But there was no pressure, no expectations, just presence. And somehow that was enough. Emma began to notice changes in herself, small ones at first. She laughed more easily. She didn't dread mornings the same way. She found herself looking forward to the quiet buzz of her phone. She told herself it was friendship. Just that, nothing more. And for a while she believed it. Until the night they met for coffee. It was after an art opening, one of those evenings where the gallery was crowded and warm, voices overlapping, people moving in and out with glasses in hand and opinions ready to share. Lucas had suggested it casually. Just coffee. Nothing complicated. Emma almost said no, but she didn't. The cafe was full when she arrived, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and conversation. She spotted Lucas immediately. He stood when he saw her. A small gesture, but it stayed with her. He looked different, not in a dramatic way, but noticeable. Taller, maybe, more grounded. His voice, when he greeted her, carried a steadiness she hadn't fully registered before. They talked like they always did. Easily, naturally, words overlapping, thoughts moving faster than either of them could organize. Time slipped. The noise of the cafe faded into the background. At one point, Emma realized something that unsettled her more than the call ever had. She hadn't thought about it. Not once. Not the call. Not the weight it had brought. It had simply disappeared from her mind. The realization hit her quietly. But it stayed. When they stepped outside, the air was cool, carrying the faint edge of the approaching night. They stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary, neither in a hurry to leave. "I'm glad we met," Lucas said. His voice was calm, but there was something careful in it. Emma nodded. "Me too." She walked home alone, but her mind stayed behind, replaying the moment again and again. She knew that pause, the one before he spoke, meant something, and that scared her, more than anything else had in a long time. Because this wasn't something she could fix, or organize, or reason her way out of. So she did what she always did when something felt too uncertain. She pulled back. Replies came slower. Messages became shorter, more neutral, more distant. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that she was setting boundaries, that this needed to stay simple. Lucas didn't push, but he noticed. She could feel it in the spaces between their conversations. The pauses, the slight shift in tone. Life moved on. Work demanded attention. Friends made plans. Emma showed up. She smiled. She participated. But at night, when everything quieted again, she felt it. The absence. The missing rhythm of something that had quietly become part of her life. And for the first time since that call at 6:42 p.m., the silence didn't just feel heavy. It felt personal. The call came on a Sunday evening. Emma had been sitting by the window, a blanket draped loosely around her shoulders, watching the lake in the distance blur into the gray sky. Chicago felt quieter on Sundays, like the city itself needed a moment to breathe before the week began again. Her phone buzzed against the table beside her. She glanced at it, already knowing. Lucas. For a moment she didn't reach for it. She had been expecting this, just not knowing when it would come. The distance she had created over the past weeks hadn't gone unnoticed. She had felt it in every delayed reply, every shortened message, every careful attempt to keep things from becoming something more. Still, seeing his name now made her chest tighten. She picked up the phone. "I don't want to be a problem," the message read. "But I feel like I did something wrong." Emma closed her eyes. There it was. Not blame, not frustration, just honesty. And somehow that made it harder. "You didn't," she typed back, then paused. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she searched for the right words, something clear, something kind, something that wouldn't make things worse. Finally, she added, "Can we meet tomorrow?" The reply came quickly. "Yes." The park by the lake was nearly empty the next day. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds that threatened rain but never quite delivered. The air carried a chill that settled into the quiet spaces between breaths. Emma arrived first. She sat on a wooden bench facing the water, her hands folded in her lap, fingers interlaced tightly as if holding on to something unseen. She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind more times than she could count. None of the versions felt right. Footsteps approached from behind. She didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to. "Hey," Lucas said gently. Emma looked up. He stood a few feet away, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, shoulders slightly tense. There was a hesitancy in him she hadn't seen before. Not uncertainty exactly, but awareness of the moment, of her. "Hi," she replied. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Lucas sat down beside her, leaving just enough space between them to feel intentional. They both looked out at the water. Gray meeting gray. "I didn't expect this," Emma said quietly. Her voice felt steadier than she expected. "I didn't plan for you to matter to me." The words lingered in the air. Lucas exhaled softly, his gaze still fixed ahead. "I didn't either." There was no defensiveness in his tone, no attempt to argue or explain, just truth. They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of small waves lapping against the shore, filling the gaps between them. Emma let her thoughts settle before continuing. "I think it just happened," she said, slowly, without either of us noticing where it was going. Lucas nodded. "That's what it feels like." Another pause. This one heavier. "We should talk about it," Emma said finally, "before it becomes something we can't control." Lucas turned slightly toward her, giving her his full attention. "I don't want to pretend it's nothing," he said. "Because it's not." Emma swallowed, her fingers tightening in her lap. "I know." The honesty between them felt fragile, important, and a little dangerous. "It's just," she continued, searching for the right words, "there are things we can't ignore." "Like what?" Lucas asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Emma let out a quiet breath. "Timing," she said. "Where we are in life. The age difference." The words felt heavier spoken aloud. Lucas leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful rather than reactive. "I've thought about that," he said. Emma glanced at him, surprised by how calm he seemed. "And?" she asked. "And it matters," he admitted. "I'm not pretending it doesn't, but I don't think it's the only thing that matters." Emma looked back at the water. "That's easy to say now." "Maybe," Lucas replied, "but it doesn't make it less true." She didn't respond immediately. Part of her wanted to push back, to reinforce the boundaries she had been trying to rebuild. But another part, the quieter, more honest part, understood what he meant. Because she felt it too. That connection wasn't something she could reduce to logic. "I don't want to hurt you," she said. Lucas's expression softened. "You won't," he said. "You don't know that," Emma replied gently. "I know you wouldn't do it intentionally." His certainty caught her off guard. It wasn't naive, it was grounded, and that made it harder to dismiss. Emma looked down at her hands. "I've spent a long time building a life that makes sense," she said. "Even when it didn't feel right. Even when it was hard, I learned how to keep things stable." Lucas listened without interrupting. "And this doesn't feel stable?" he asked quietly. Emma hesitated. "No," she admitted. "It doesn't." "Does that make it wrong?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, at the sincerity in his expression, at the way he held her gaze without pressure, without expectation. "I don't know," she said. And for the first time, that answer felt honest. They talked for a long time. About small things at first, how the past weeks had felt, how the distance had affected them both. Lucas admitted he had noticed the shift almost immediately. "It felt like I lost something," he said, even though nothing had actually happened. Emma understood that. She had felt it too, the absence of something that hadn't been clearly defined. They moved carefully into deeper territory, talking about expectations, about fear, about the way connection could grow without permission. "I don't need answers right now," Lucas said at one point. "I just didn't want to disappear without understanding what this is." Emma nodded. "You won't disappear," she said softly. She meant it, even if she didn't yet know what staying would look like. The days that followed felt different, not lighter, but clearer. The conversation at the park hadn't solved anything. It hadn't created a plan or defined their relationship, but it had removed the uncertainty that had been quietly building between them. They returned to talking, slowly at first, then more naturally. The rhythm came back, but it wasn't the same as before. There was awareness now, of what they were to each other, of what they could become, and of the line they were both trying not to cross too quickly. They met occasionally, always in public places, cafes, bookstores, walking paths near the lake. Their interactions stayed respectful, measured. But there was something underneath it now, something unspoken but understood. A glance that lasted a second longer than it should. A pause in conversation that carried more meaning than words. Emma found herself noticing things she hadn't before. The way Lucas listened, not just to her words, but to what she didn't say. The way he remembered small details. The way he gave her space without pulling away. It wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't intense in the way she had once associated with connection. It was steady, and that steadiness made it harder to ignore. One evening, Emma sat in her apartment, scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone. A message from Lucas appeared. "I don't want to lose you." She stared at it, read it again, and again. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't complicated, but they carried weight, a kind of quiet urgency she hadn't expected. Emma leaned back against the couch, her heart beating a little faster. She had tried to create distance for a reason, to protect both of them, to keep things simple. But nothing about this felt simple anymore. She typed slowly, "Let's meet. We need to talk." The next day the sky was overcast again. The same park, the same bench. But everything felt different. Lucas arrived a few minutes after her. There was no hesitation this time. No careful distance. Just a shared understanding that this conversation mattered. They didn't sit right away. Instead, they started walking along the edge of the lake, side by side, close but not touching. "I didn't expect to feel this connected," Lucas said after a while. His voice was quiet. "Honest." Emma nodded. "Neither did I." They walked a few more steps before she spoke again. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said. "I just needed someone when things felt heavy." Lucas glanced at her. "And now?" Emma took a breath. "Now you matter to me," she said simply. The words felt like a line being crossed. Lucas stopped walking. She did too. "I've never met anyone like you," he said. "You make things feel calmer, like I don't have to rush or prove anything." Emma felt something shift inside her, a mix of warmth and fear, because she felt the same way, and that made it real. They sat on the bench again, closer this time, not intentionally, just naturally. "We need to be honest," Emma said after a while. "We can't pretend this is just casual." Lucas nodded. "I'm not pretending. I don't want you to hold back your life because of me," she continued. "I'm not," he said. "I'm choosing to be here." The simplicity of that statement stayed with her. Choosing, not drifting, not reacting, but choosing. And Emma realized something then. This wasn't something happening to them. It was something they were both stepping into. Carefully, knowingly. The weeks that followed became a quiet balancing act. They didn't rush into anything. They didn't label what they were, but they didn't deny it either. They spent time together, talked every day, shared pieces of their lives in ways that felt natural, not forced. Emma found herself laughing more, feeling lighter, but also more aware of the reality outside their connection, of the questions that would eventually come, of the challenges they hadn't yet faced. Still, she didn't pull away this time, because for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to, and that truth stayed with her, quiet but undeniable, as everything between them continued to grow. By the time autumn began to fade into winter, Emma understood something she hadn't been ready to admit before. Some connections don't arrive loudly. They don't demand attention or force decisions. They settle in quietly, and then, one day, you realize they've changed the way you exist. Lucas had become part of her rhythm, not in a way that disrupted her life, but in a way that reshaped it. Morning started with messages, not always long, not always meaningful, just consistent. Hope your day goes well. Don't forget your meeting. You'll do fine. Emma found herself smiling at her phone more often than she ever had. It wasn't excitement in the dramatic sense, it was steadiness. Something she could rely on without questioning it. Evenings often ended the same way. Short conversations, sometimes deep, sometimes light, but always present. And somewhere between those moments, without either of them noticing when exactly it happened, they had crossed into something more. Not officially, not in words, but in feeling. They celebrated small things together. Emma's promotion at work, Lucas finishing a difficult semester, a quiet dinner after a long week, a walk by the lake when the air turned cold and sharp. Nothing about it felt rushed. Nothing felt forced, and yet everything felt significant. Emma noticed it most in the quiet moments, the ones that didn't demand attention. Sitting side by side in a cafe, both doing separate things but aware of each other's presence. Walking without speaking, the silence comfortable instead of heavy. Looking at him and realizing she didn't feel the loneliness she had carried for years. Lucas, in his own way, had changed too. He seemed more grounded, more certain of himself. Not because Emma had tried to guide him, but because she gave him space to be heard, to be understood. And that, more than anything, had shaped him. They didn't talk about the future often, not directly, but it lingered. In the pauses between sentences, in the moments where reality brushed up against what they had built. People started to notice. At first it was subtle. A comment here, a glance there. Friends asking questions in careful tones. Coworkers making quiet observations. Nothing confrontational, but enough. Lucas noticed it too. Conversations with friends shifted. Jokes that carried a little too much meaning. Questions that didn't quite feel like curiosity. He handled it calmly. But Emma saw it. She felt it. And she knew. This wasn't something they could keep untouched forever. One evening they sat in Emma's apartment. The city outside was alive with winter lights. Reflections bouncing off windows and streets below. Inside it was quiet. Warm. Safe. Emma stood near the window, arms crossed loosely, her gaze fixed on the distance. Lucas sat on the couch watching her, not with pressure. Not with expectation, but with understanding. He knew that look. She was thinking. And when Emma thought like that, it meant something mattered. "I don't want to be something that holds you back," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight. Lucas didn't respond immediately. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're not holding me back," he said. Emma turned toward him. "Not right now," she replied. "But life changes. Your life will change. So will yours," he said quietly. She gave a small, almost tired smile. "That's different." "Why?" Emma hesitated. Because explaining it meant acknowledging everything she had been, trying to balance internally. "Because I've already lived through a lot of those changes," she said. "You're still at the beginning of them." Lucas sat back slightly, considering her words. "And that means I shouldn't choose what feels right to me?" he asked. "It means I don't want to influence that choice in a way you might question later." There it was, the truth. Not fear of judgment, not fear of difficulty, but fear of becoming something he might one day regret. Lucas looked at her carefully. "I don't feel influenced," he said. "I feel clear." Emma held his gaze. "And what if that changes?" "Then it changes," he said simply. "That's part of life, isn't it?" His answer was honest. But Emma knew life didn't always work that cleanly. She had lived long enough to understand that timing could reshape even the strongest connections. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of," she admitted. The room felt quiet, not uncomfortable, but full. Lucas stood and walked toward her slowly. He didn't rush, didn't try to close the space too quickly. When he reached her, he stopped just close enough for her to feel his presence. "I don't want to be someone you regret," he said. Emma's breath caught slightly. "I don't regret you," she replied immediately. "I know," he said softly, "but I don't want to become something complicated in your life either." That word lingered. Complicated. Because that's what this was. Not wrong. Not inappropriate in its foundation, but layered. Real in a way that didn't fit neatly into expectations. Emma looked down briefly, gathering her thoughts. When she looked back up, there was clarity in her expression. Not certainty about what she wanted, but certainty about what she needed to say. "This matters to me," she said. Lucas nodded. "It matters to me too. And that's why we have to be careful with it." He didn't argue, didn't resist. Because he understood, this wasn't rejection. It wasn't distance for the sake of fear. It was respect for each other, for timing, for everything outside of what they felt. They didn't make the decision in one moment. It happened gradually, like everything else between them. They began to create space again. But this time, it wasn't uncertain. It wasn't confusing. It was intentional. Conversations became less frequent, not absent, just lighter. Meetings became occasional, not routine, still meaningful, but different. They didn't pretend nothing had happened. They didn't force themselves back into something smaller than what they had shared. They simply allowed it to shift, naturally, respectfully, and with an understanding that some things don't need to be held.